Kolkata is famous for its sweet Bengali desserts and its rich intellectual culture. But beneath that sunny, daytime vibrancy sits a location widely considered to be the most terrifying place in India. These aged, handwritten manuscripts are just a fraction of the rare collection housed deep inside the National Library of Kolkata. It's the largest public library in the country, drawing thousands of students who seek out texts they simply cannot find anywhere else. But when the sun goes down, locals refuse to go anywhere near this colonial-era building. Rumors of moving furniture and wandering spirits make the night shift a job almost nobody wants to take. Veer Bahadur took that job. He was a highly experienced night guard assigned to patrol the library's massive western lawn. Veer relied entirely on strict logic, dismissing the rumors because he simply did not believe in the paranormal. That absolute skepticism was about to collide with 2 centuries of dark history, proving that logic offers zero protection when the past begins to wake up. In local tradition, Amavasya, the night of the new moon, is when the boundary between the living and the dead is at its absolute thinnest. It is a time when the library's dormant energy reaches its most hostile peak. Deep inside an isolated inner reading room, a 14-year-old student named Saurabh was studying. He was so completely absorbed in his books that he lost all track of time. But at time Saurabh looked up, day had turned to pitch black. When he walked to the exit, the heavy wooden doors wouldn't budge. They were locked tight from the outside. He pounded on the wood, but in the massive, empty building, nobody answered calls for help. Outside, Veer patrolled the dark grounds, oblivious. Inside, Saurabh was sealed in an environment that was about to defy every law of science. Out on the lawn, Veer sat in his guard shack, listening to his radio. Suddenly, the signal dropped. Through heavy static, a harsh, angry British voice cut through the speaker, declaring, "Tonight is my night." For the first time in his career, Veer felt a cold spike of panic. The radio slipped from his hands. Before it even hit the floor, a thunderous crash echoed from inside the library, the heavy, unmistakable sound of dozens of wooden bookshelves violently collapsing. Inside the locked reading room, Saurabh wasn't alone. Suspended in the air was a terrifying woman in a white colonial dress. Her face was completely deformed. She ignored Saurabh entirely, obsessively rearranging the fallen books on the shelves. Saurabh screamed in terror. The entity stopped. She snapped her head toward him, letting out a guttural growl. Saurabh dove under a reading table, but the woman just kept arranging books, repeatedly leaning down to peer under the table with a slow, sinister smile. This haunting had evolved into an active, aggressive threat, fully aware of the living and focused entirely on terror. The heavy reading room doors finally burst open. Veer rushed in, and a sobbing Saurabh immediately clung to him. The ghostly woman had vanished without a trace, leaving Veer to briefly wonder if the terrified boy had imagined the whole thing. Then, a violent crashing sound erupted from beneath their feet. Veer quickly sent Saurabh outside to safety and descended alone into the pitch-black basement of the library to investigate. As he shined his flashlight into the dark corners of the basement, the beam illuminated absolutely nothing, but his ears told a different story. He could clearly hear the heavy, metallic clink of invisible chains, accompanied by the agonizing screams of a man being brutally beaten. Veer ran. He fled the basement, sprinting out into the center of the western lawn. But right in the middle of the grass sat an ornate, centuries-old wooden palanquin, a carriage that had definitely not been there 10 minutes earlier. Angry and terrified, Veer marched up to the carriage and ripped back the curtain. Sitting inside was a man dressed in British colonial attire. His body was covered in severe wounds, but he didn't look dead, nor did he look alive. The wounded man locked eyes with Veer, glaring at him with pure rage. Then, in one sudden, violent motion, the man's head detached completely from his shoulders and rolled out of the carriage, coming to a stop right at Veer's feet. One night was all it took. Veer's lifelong belief and logic shattered right there on the grass, forcing him to bolt from the property immediately. The next morning, Veer returned in broad daylight, strictly to hand in his resignation. An older guard listened to his story and laid out the historical facts behind the horrors. Before it was a library, this massive building was the residence of Warren Hastings, the first British Governor-General of India. That harsh, possessive voice on the radio claiming the night belonged to him? This image shows the type of wooden palanquin used in the colonial era. The headless man Veer saw inside one was Philip Francis. He engaged in a bloody duel with Hastings right on that very lawn. Francis was placed in a palanquin just like this to get medical help, but he died before he could be saved. The floating woman was Lady Metcalfe, the wife of a governor-general who meticulously managed the library. Her restless spirit remains violently obsessed with the entire collection, aggressively punishing anyone she feels disrespects or misplaces the books. These events were a terrifying, perfect loop of documented colonial history, playing on a permanent repeat. The horrors of the basement map to a much darker chapter of the British Empire, visible in the oppressive colonial control seen in archival photos like this one of Clive Street. The library's lower levels were used as an actual torture chamber. Innocent people were chained to those basement walls and killed. The agonizing screams Veer heard were the residual echoes of actual historical torture victims, permanently trapped deep within the architecture. Hearing the true history behind his terrifying night cemented Veer's decision. He walked out the gates and never stepped foot near the National Library again. It leaves a chilling question for the rest of us. The next time you visit a beautiful historical monument, stop and listen. Are you truly alone? Or are the unseen ghosts of history standing right beside you in the cold, dark shadows?